Hi, this is Misha, and this is an introduction to Kalashnikov AK type rifles. I'm going to try to make this, as straightforward and basic and as short as possible. If you're an AK enthusiast, this will probably not be your video, but if you are getting into the AK, if you're tired of the AR-15, just kind of getting into the AK, as a lot of people have been doing, I hope this video might be helpful in getting the very basics down. So to start off, I have three of the basic different types on the table. This is a Polish 1960, which is an AK Type 3 milled receiver. This is the original AK type gun. Next we have an Egyptian Mahdi ARM. This is a clone of the Soviet AKM called the stamped AK. And finally, we have a Bulgarian Arsenal SLR 105, which is a clone of the AK-47, also on a stamped receiver. These two fire the 7.62 by 39 M43 cartridge, which is the most common Kalashnikov cartridge. This one fires the more recently developed 5.45 by 39 M74 cartridge, which was essentially Soviet Russia's take on 223 Remington 5.56 NATO. There are differences, but for all intents and purposes, they are the same. But they're not interchangeable. Please know that. Not getting into many of the details, but just to talk about the basic guns. The mill gun was the original. This receiver is milled. We have a medium heavy profile 16-inch barrel, 14mm muzzle threads. This is an earlier slab side mag. All of your standard 7.62 by 39 AKs, both AK-47s, AKMs, they all use the same basic magazines and drums. They're interchangeable. They were standardized. Basically, looking at a milled AK, everything's going to be a little beefier. This top cover is smooth, as you see. It's a little heavier gauge steel. We have a slick slab-sided handguard that's made out of pretty thick wood. This one has a wooden pistol grip, pretty large. Some will have polymer. The original mill gun used a double hook trigger. A lot of the ones in the US have a single hook just because of 922R and all that jazz. One major difference worth noting is that the bayonet lug is under the front sight on a milled gun. Also, the sling swivel is on the gas block. Finally, the buttstock itself attaches differently. As you see, there's a tang on the top with a single screw. And there is a tang on the bottom with 2 screws. This buttstock has a little more of a sweep down to it as well. Milled guns are heavier by about 2 pounds, but they also tend to be a little smoother. And there aren't rivets on the sides. Now, the original mills had a barrel that was screwed in, but most more recent constructions have a pressed and pinned in barrel, which is the more modern manufacturing technique taken from the AKM. Now, the milled guns first started to appear in Russia in the early 50s and were replaced in 1959 by the AKM, the AK modernized. This was made to be a lighter gun. So we have a stamped receiver that has rivets holding things and the trunnions in. But the trunnion itself, which is where the bolt locks, is still machined, milled, if you will. We still have a 16.25-inch barrel, but we've gone to a lighter weight profile. We still have 14mm threads on the muzzle, although most AKMs have this sugar scoop looking brake. They went to this brake to try to check recoil, especially in full auto, because the gun was over 2 pounds lighter than the milled. The bayonet lug is no longer at the front sight. It's now been moved back here. Now this is an import, so the lug was machined off, but you can see where it was. And it's a different shape and takes a different bayonet. The sling swivel was moved to the handguard retainer. The handguards themselves, the uppers are basically the same, but the lowers are not interchangeable. This one has palm swells, and just the way they fit into the front of the receiver is different. You can get a milled handguard to fit on a stamped gun, but it'll fit very, very loose. If you try to put a stamped lower handguard on a milled gun, it won't fit without a lot of machining and fitting. We've gone to a thinner top cover that now has ridges on it for strength. Most, if not all, of your stamped guns have a single hook trigger. And now we usually have synthetic polymer type pistol grips. This is actually an AG4 material, often called Bakelite, but you get the idea. The buttstock is a major difference. We have one tang on the top now, shorter, and no tang on the bottom. It has one screw here externally, and we have one screw internally. So an AKM buttstock is held on with one tang and two screws, whereas a milled AK-47 is held on with three screws by two tangs. Also, the sweep is much less on a a stamped buttstock. They more straight inline. The whole idea when they designed this gun was lightweight. To that end, they also went to a lighter magazine with these ridges, again for strength. This is the very common AK 30 round mag we all know and love today. Originally, milled guns would have a blued finish, and the standard AKM would usually have a paint over park type finish, although some were blued and some weren't. The different countries made these. Now the AK-74 is quite a departure. It's based on the AKM, to be sure. In fact, the early prototypes of the 74s were nothing more than rechambered AKMs for all intents and purposes. But we're firing a new cartridge, so obviously we have a smaller bore diameter. We still have a 16¼ inch barrel. The muzzle threads have now changed. They are no longer 14 millimeter. Now we're at 24, which is a larger. And instead of the barrel itself being threaded, this is on a collar, which is a piece with this front sight tower. Also, the bayonet lug has again been moved to below the front sight to lock on to the brake. And it's the same shape as on an AKM, but it's forward. Now this brake is probably a very iconic part of the AK-74. It is a very well done brake, the originals anyway. There was a hollow expansion chamber in here with asymmetrical ports to let gas vent out to press it down and to the left. And then we have the brake itself up here, which vents out gas up into the sides and presses down to keep recoil and muzzle rise to a minimum. Another major change with the AK-74 is we've gone away from the 45-degree gas block to a 90-degree. That's an easy way to tell one at a distance. If you see a 90-degree block, it's probably an AK-47. Excuse me, a 74, not a 47. The handguards are virtually the same. The palm swells are a little bit different shaped, but for our purposes, palm swell. The furniture itself is interchangeable with an AKM. Same riveted receiver, stamped with the machined trunnions. The buttstock attaches the same, but the stock itself now has these lightning cuts and now has a ribbed butt plate instead of smooth. So you can tell by the plate. And the pistol grips are essentially the same. Now, of course, the magazines are different. These still fire from 30 round mags, but since we've gone to a new caliber, they're straighter and a little smaller. The original ones are made out of this AG4 material, often called Bakelite. It's not Bakelite, but We can call it that because that's kind of its colloquial name. Later mags would be made of colored polymer, and then more recently just black polymer. Internally, these work the same as the first two. Now in full auto, the AKM and the AK-74 had an out-of-battery safety, often called a rate reducer. The original AK-47 AK did not. But for the most part, the bolt groups they operate exactly the same. Obviously the one in the 545 can't be dropped into the 7.62 guns because of being a different caliber, but it works exactly the same. We have a long stroke piston with 2 lugs. In fact, I'll just pull this out for you here. Why not? These guns disassemble very easily. Take the desk cover off, push this recoil spring forward. It comes off. It's a captive spring, as you see. And then your bolt group pulls out. We have a long stroke gas piston, which is attached to the carrier. Now notice this has some wiggle. That's a good thing. That's tolerances, letting it fluctuate so it won't get bound up or scrape against the side. Really, all of your factory-built AKs will have some play in the piston, but don't worry. This is screwed into the carrier and then pinned on top of that in. So it's both screwed and pinned in. It's not coming off. A little play is actually a good thing. The carrier itself is this piece. The handle is part of it. The bolt comes off very, very easily. You just kind of need to rotate it out of its thing. Well, this one's going to be, there we go. It just rotates out. Very simple bolt. 2 lugs, it rotates. The extractor is part of the bolt face. The ejector is actually inside the receiver. It's fixed to the receiver. Most of your military guns will have a free-floated firing pin. Some of your commercials and new production militaries may have a spring-loaded. And if you look inside, since we took that out, you'll see there's nothing inside this AK. There's your trigger group, which is also very easy to remove, and that's all your internals. Your rear trunnion is back here for the buttstock. It's machined. Your front trunnion, which is where your bolt locks, is machined. And then you have the stamped receiver holding this all together. That's really it. They're very simple inside. This gas tube also comes off by just flipping this lever up for cleaning, but it's hollow too. There's nothing in it. It's a very simple gun, which is contributing to its legendary reliability and all that. Now, something that gets brought up, people ask all the time, milled versus stamped. Which should I buy? Is the milled better? Really, no. The milled guns tend to be smoother, cosmetically nicer. Sometimes people don't like to see rivets. But as far as durability and reliability, not really. When is the last time you heard of the stamped receiver failing on an AKM AK-74? Because the stamped part itself doesn't really take much of the force. The bolt still locks into and recoils against a machined trunnion, a milled trunnion. So the load-bearing parts are still machined. Granted, this isn't as smooth as a gun such as this, but again, that's a very cosmetic thing. At the same time, this gun is over 2 pounds heavier, and it takes its own pattern of buttstock and handguard, whereas you can find furniture for stamped guns such as either of these very easily. Parts seem to be more available for the stamped guns. Mill guns, they will sometimes take parts from stamped, but everything's made a little different. For example, the bolt carrier and the bolt don't have lightning cuts as on the stamped. So there are little differences in a lot of the production stuff. I say if you want a mill, great, mill guns are fine. But don't buy one because you think it's going to last longer. It really won't. Both guns are about as equally durable and equally have the same lifespan. And the thing about milled, there have not been very many milled receivers imported into this country. You had the original ones from the 80s from China. You have the Arsenal ones such as what this is built on. Otherwise, though, if you look at the American-made ones, some of them are truly milled. Some of them are actually cast and then milled into final shape. So even then, they're not true mills. Obviously, it's a personal preference thing, but AKM's AK stamped receiver guns have just as much longevity and durability. No worries at all about that. And they are considerably lighter and parts are easier to find and generally less expensive. So there we go. As far as the magazines, like I said, all your 7.62 39 guns will take the same types of mags. All of your 5.45 guns will also take the same types of mags, even if they look different. Where you get into problems is getting into other calibers such as 223, 5.56. That's because these guns were all made under Soviet supervision and design, where they took pains to make sure everyone's standardized. Most of your nations that were making AKs and 223, 5.56 made them independently on their own. So for example, a Chinese 223 mag may not work in a Bulgarian 223, which may not work in a Polish 223. There's a bunch of tolerance stacking and things. There are some that are interchangeable, some that aren't, and some that are but don't work great. Basically, if you're going to get a 223, try to get the right mag that was made from the factory. So that's if you get into that, just be aware ahead of time that all 223 mags are not interchangeable. So you can't just go buy a Galil mag and say pop it into a Vepr in 223 and expect it to work right out of the box. Another thing to take into account are the various folding stocks out there on AKs, and there are many variations in models and styles, but I've tried to pick the three most common here just to give an introduction. In my hands is a Serbian Zastava NPAP DF. This has the original Russian two-strut underfolding metal stock. This was based on the MP40. Now the original milled AK had a slightly altered version, but for all intents and purposes, this is the same. This one is copied off the AKMS, the stamped gun. Underfolds here. And then this butt plate folds up. This one's really stiff. These DFs usually are when they're new. This locks in on both sides. The original milled underfolder only locked in on the left side. But yeah, this is the underfolding stock. It allows the gun to be very compact. There's no trunnion hanging off the back. On the other hand, many complain of the uncomfortable cheek weld. So just be aware of that if you go for an underfolding gun. I also wanted to bring the NPAP out because it takes its own pattern of handguards. These are extended handguards with 3 vents as opposed to 2 on most AKMs. So the Yugoslavian pattern, the Zastava pattern guns take their own proprietary handguards. They also retain the heavier AK-47 AK profile barrel versus the AKM lighter profile. Some, like this one, are built on a 1.0 mil receiver, millimeter thick receiver. Others, like the OPAP, are built on a 1.5 heavier, dutier receiver. Also, for whatever reason, Zastava never used chrome line bores in their 7.62 39 guns. These are still hammer forged, cold hammer forged barrels. Very good quality, but they are not chrome lined, so be aware of that if you look into any of the Zastava guns. Another type of folding stock is on this gun here. Now this is a Romanian Sar Tube. This one's in 5.45 as it happens, but you can find this style of stock on quite a few guns. This is a push button side folder. Goes to the right. There are also versions that instead of having a push button have a lever, but same basic principle. This stock was originally made in Germany in the early 70s, this style, and then it was copied by both Poland, Romania, and even Egypt did a version in the 80s. This stock has pros and cons. It's not all that comfortable for a cheek weld, but probably still better because it is at least rounded off than the underfolder. It is relatively light. On the other hand, it has a block that hangs off the back of the gun for more than an inch, so it adds some length in the back. The flip side to that, this stock fits into a standard rear trunnion, so you can easily take this stock off and put a fixed stock on if you wanted to without having to use a different rear trunnion or receiver, which is why Germany initially came up with it, and several countries also adopted it. The logistics of it were very favorable. Also looking at the SAR 2, this appears to have an AK-74 muzzle brake, and this one was copied from it. However, this is 22 millimeter, not 24 as on standard. Now, a few years ago, mentioning this wouldn't even be important in a 101 video, but recently, parts kits have finally hit our shores for the full auto version, which is called the PA86. So you're starting to see some kit builds from Atlantic and others featuring the original 22 millimeter threaded front sight base. And there are not many devices cut for the 22 threads because they were unique to Romania. So just, 24 is standard, but the 22 is kind of unique. And finally, we have this style here. Now this is an Arsenal SLR 104 FR. This is essentially the folding stock version of that 105 we just looked at in the first part. It has this triangular stock developed in Russia. There is a button on the side here to fold it. Just press in and it latches. This has a lot of benefits. It doesn't have a block hanging off the back. When it's folded up, it's quite slim. It doesn't add a lot of extra width to the gun. And this is a very lightweight stock with a pretty good cheek weld. And to unfold it, there's just a second latch in here. Now, once upon a time, these stock sets were available, and a lot of people would ask, can I install one of these on something like a Wasser, a fixed stock gun? The short answer is no, not really, because even though a good gunsmith can, you have to do a lot of work. You have to cut the back of the receiver, take out the old trunnion, reprofile the back with the slant, install the new trunnion, which has different rivet spots. Then you have to cut out the latch on this side here, and then back here. Then you have to cut out where it comes out on this side there. And even after you get all that back done, you still have to cut for the front latch up here. It's on the side, and then there's also its pivot pins down here. So you have to cut the receiver in a couple of spots here. So while you can take a fixed stock gun and put one of these on it, it requires pretty good skill with reshaping metal. And keep in mind, this is the gun part of a Kalashnikov, this receiver. So if you screw it up, you have to basically buy a whole new gun. I was never that brave to either do it myself or even commission. It just simply seemed easier if I, person wanted one of these just to buy a gun that already came with it. So if you have a fixed stocked gun, using one of these German Romanian style folders is the easy way. You just pull your fixed stock off, drop this on, put the screws back in. Now these do use machine screws for metal instead of the wood screws, but otherwise they fit right in. That's your best option if you have a fixed stock gun. Likewise, a lot of the other adapters like Ace and Magpul will fit in the standard rear trunnion as well, but of course they're not military spec. Underfolding. If you get an underfolder And this is another question I've seen asked a lot. If I buy an underfolder, can I go to a different stock type later? No, not really. Again, this uses its own unique rear trunnion with its own rivet pattern and own locking. So if you buy an underfolder, you're pretty much stuck with an underfolder. Now there are good gunsmiths who could reverse it, but you still have these large cutouts on the side of the receiver you'd have to fill in. This was just a very brief intro for people getting into the Kalashnikov. We have several other videos, some of them looking at why you should buy an imported AK over a US made one. We have another one looking at the import history of the whole series of semi-autos. We also have a series on all the different variations, the original AK, the AKM, AK-74, even the RPK, and the AKSU, the Krinkov. So if you're interested in more of the history and all the variations, or even then we don't hit them all, but more detailed in this video, well, please check them out. We've got a couple of playlists with them listed there. So this video is just to kind of get you into the AK a little bit, show you what it was. A lot of people have been interested in it just because they're bored of the AR, and that's fine. Are these guns really more reliable than an AR? Honestly, today, not so much, because the AR has been really perfected and honed over the years, and most manufacturers today use quality parts. So a good AR will be as reliable as an AK. On top of that, it's usually lighter weight, or can be. It's much easier to mount optics on it. Magazines are available. 223 is out there in large numbers, different loadings, and generally ARs are more accurate. Now this has less to do with the platform itself and more to do with the cartridge. 223 5.56 NATO is just more accurate, more flat shooting than 7.62 by 39. Now that said, 5.45, such as these guns, is more accurate, generally speaking. But many companies have tuned the AK system and achieved 1 MOA, close to it, or even sub MOA with match ammo. So the AK operating system is not inherently inaccurate. It's more down to the cartridge and the loose military tolerances that guns are made to be reliable. So the AR is actually still a good choice, but if you just want something new, there are a lot of AK options, and you can check out all of our other videos and all the other videos of, say, AK Operators Union and Military Arms Channel and so on and so forth, and just see what's out there, because there's a lot of choices and you can probably find the right one that suits your needs. Well, if you have any questions or comments, please post them below and I'll be happy to try to answer them. If you liked the video, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed and are getting into the AK, we'd appreciate it if you could do that, and we'll try to deliver some good info on these guns. As always, this is Misha, and please tune in again next time for more hopefully interesting and unique videos. We'll catch you then.